Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Okay, we'll do it. Thank you.
Alrighty, welcome everyone. This is our first MSPs in conversation for the year, so we're glad to be back. Today we are presenting a very hot topic, cyber insights for Aussie MSPs, navigating risks and protections. So we've got a few experts here, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a second, but very quickly, just introducing Hosted Network. So if you don't already know, Hosted Network are a wholesale cloud and telco provider. We deliver cloud and telco the way it should be. All right. We were an MSP. This year marks our 20-year anniversary, and we have been wholesale only, serving MSPs for 10 years now. We service over 200 odd MSPs across Australia. And yeah, I won't go into all of our services, but feel free to reach out if you are new to MSPs in conversation, or if you'd like to learn more about Hosted Network. But enough about us. Guys, thank you for joining us today. Today we've got Aaron, Andrew, and Jason. So I'll start with Andrew. Andrew, can you introduce yourself and SherpaTech, please?
Absolutely, thank you, Ben. And yeah, it's great to be on this webinar. I'm Andrew Bremner. I'm the Managing Director of SherpaTech Insurance, and we are specialists in insurance for tech and IT companies. And just a little bit of background, we have an existing business called Sherpa Insurance, and we found that our fastest growing segment was MSPs, and they needed unique specialized attention. So we've set up a specialist brand and offering just for tech and IT, and that is SherpaTech.
Thanks, Andrew. And Aaron, you're not a stranger to MSPs in conversation, but today you're wearing a different shirt or hat. I'm not sure which it is.
I don't know. Hey, everyone. Yeah, so Aaron Jacobs. So currently, and today, I am one of the global sales engineers for Sophos. We handle a whole bunch of different things at Sophos. Any of you that are familiar with Sophos, there's a large range of things that we do, and I focus very much on the MDR and incident response side of the shop. But prior to that, last year, I moved to Sophos. But before that, I spent 20 years in the MSP space, and I was general manager of Roden Business Solutions. So we were, I think we're about 4,500 seats, 150 odd customers. So yeah,
they've probably doubled that since you've left.
But I'm sure it's skyrocketed since I've gone. Yeah, huge numbers.
Great. Jason, welcome.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm Jason from ISO 365, basically a business that's focusing on helping MSPs achieve their ISO certifications. I have been working in MSP land for the past 15 or so years across a few MSPs, and so mainly working in the operations areas of the businesses. And so, you know, like many people on the call today, I think that you know, the conversation about ISO is getting lumped with either the general manager or the ops guys and girls out there. So yeah, obviously I've been doing that and now launching ISO 365. Yeah.
Great. Well, today we have a heap of questions that we want to run through for you guys, but I will throw it out to the audience. If you guys have any specific questions that you'd like to ask our panelists, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Get the conversation going. As always, we will answer them as we go. But to set the tone, I'm going to stop sharing. So, because this is all about what you guys have to say as our experts. To set the tone, Aaron, I'm going to start with you. Cyber insurance is a, cyber risk is a very hot topic in general. We're seeing threats go through the roof. It feels like every week there's a major brand on the 7 o'clock news that's being breached. I know that you and I have had plenty of chats about war stories, but can you talk to us a little bit about some of the issues that you've seen MSPs facing, and I guess just try and highlight some of the common causes that our customers are being breached by?
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. So look, I'll start with coming to Sophos and then seeing the other side of the fence was mind-blowing to see the amount of things that go on. Like, you hear about it in the media a lot, but that's the big names. That's the stuff that you see, like you said, in the news. The reality is I feel like everyone is getting breached. I know it's not everyone, but everyone's a target. And it happens a lot. MSPs are under attack. Literally everyone's under attack. And it's just more about, like, the low-hanging fruit is the real stuff that these attacks come in every day. So my team globally, we deal with the incident response. So we see, unfortunately, we're the first people, responding to an incident, and for anyone really, non-Sophos customers or Sophos customers. So the stuff that we see, look, it's horrible. And the big things that we see really regularly are unpatched things. So Ben, you mentioned big names. Look into the tech sector and look at zero-day vulnerabilities. That, like, you automatically think of Microsoft when you think of patching, but there are vulnerabilities in almost everything. The reality is there's vulnerabilities in every piece of software. Not all of them have been discovered yet. So where people are getting attacked, it's from not being able to patch quick enough, and that comes back on MSPs. And I mean, you hear all the reports, and every vendor has a statistic and a number, and social campaigns and social
Gartner chart,
all that stuff. Sorry?
And a Gartner chart.
A Gartner chart, and I hate the statistics. 93% of this and 27% of this, whatever. You can make up a percentage about anything, but the real truth of the matter is, it's the stuff that, as MSPs, we all are meant to be managing and patching and dealing with, that is the stuff that's getting hit. And you can do all your job perfectly. You can patch everything, and then something will come in through, a user that gets socially engineered, or I think of VPN connections without MFA on it. It only takes an intruder just to get in a little bit, and then once they're in, they start working through your environment, and unfortunately, they're doing a really, really good job of it. They're better than all the MSPs I've ever met out there, including ours, of being able to manipulate their way through a network. So yeah, look, it's scary. They come in through any way they can, but look, I would always say the vulnerabilities are the huge one. I know statistics might say social engineering, but I often think that when you talk about the really, really big companies that spend millions of dollars on security, that's the only real way they can get in through social engineering, because they have really good systems in play. For all the small businesses out there and MSPs out there who are juggling way too many things, not being able to put the latest Fortinet firewall patch on that came out last week and is now being attacked, or came out a few weeks ago before that, or the pick insert vendor here, there's a new vendor every day. That's the ways they're getting in, and once they're in, they're starting to work their way through. So yeah, it's pretty eye-opening, and scary to see this kind of stuff happening.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. We our internal security team, they were doing a bit of a demo the other day. We've got an internal project called Guardian, which everyone will hear more about this year. And we monitor everyone's connections for vulnerabilities, and we're about to start presenting that data to our partners. And it's crazy the amount of vulnerabilities that will just pop up in, be it a Draytech or a D-Link or something like that.
Yep. And
it is scary to see how quickly you can actually get in and control, whether that be an RDP server sitting behind or whatnot. It's very scary. So it sounds like a risk that we can't really entirely manage, right? We do our best. So I guess that's what today is about. So thank you for setting that kind of that tone. So I guess the first thing is, we need to mitigate and manage that as much as we possibly can. But there's always a risk, which is where cyber insurance comes in. So Andrew, I'm going to start with you next, please. If we have a breach, what are the key things from an insurance perspective, right, should we do and should we, most importantly, not do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, love to answer that, Ben. And Aaron, you've basically just leveraging from what you said, you're absolutely bang on. Every piece of software has vulnerabilities, and so often it's a matter of more a when than an if. It's really sad. And where we come in is on, once the data breach has happened, is after Jason's piece of work or Aaron, your solutions actually get breached, and it doesn't work. So we get in at the point where there has been a breach, there's a loss of data, and here's what do you do? So the first thing is, keep in mind that insurance is that second line of defense. So once you have that second line of defense, what do you need to do? The first thing is you contact your insurance broker or you contact the cyber insurer. And the reason you do that is the cyber insurer has a 24/7 incident response team to hand. And these guys specialize in actually stopping the damage. And why do they do that? They do that to reduce their exposure and reduce their loss. So if they can jump in and get control at the get-go, they have a better chance of succeeding. So first thing is you get hold of the insurer or via your insurance broker. Then there's a whole bunch of things. Once you've assessed where the leak happened, you must, of course, stop the leak. But again, use the help of the incident response people, because at the end of the day, the incident response people, they're in the business of dealing with the data breach, whereas the MSP is really in the business of keeping the lights on. And from where we sit, they do an incredible job for their customers. MSPs are amazing and innovative to keep the lights on, but they're perhaps not so innovative when it comes to data breaches, not sure what to do. So that's why it's very important, engage that insurer early, and away we go. And we've actually prepared a data breach checklist that we'll make available to everyone on the call as a starting point.
So, okay, so if the first thing that we need to do is call, I wonder with the MSPs on the line, if many of you will actually know who to call, or if your customers will know who to call. Is that, I guess, Jason and Aaron, you guys have run MSPs before, and it was that kind of a standard practice that you found that you had those details on hand?
You want to go, Jason?
Yeah, it depends how organized you are, I suppose.
Politically correct answer. Well said.
I wasn't going to be politically correct.
I would dare say that a lot of MSPs wouldn't have that information on hand, especially if they haven't I'll take the question from an ISO perspective, but if they don't have a management system in place, whether it be certified or not, if they don't have a management system in place to make sure that they know where to go to find these details, well, then they're just going to be, the first port of call is going to be Googling, what the hell do I do? We've just had a breach. So yeah, I don't think that many MSPs out there would know what to do. Depending on how big the breach is, you do have to let the regulators and the authorities know. That's where it can get. That can be where it gets a bit scary, because you've obviously got internal reporting, but you've also got external reporting. So it all really depends on what's happening in your business. But if you don't have a management system that's set up for you to be able to go to a direct spot and find out what you need, yeah, you're not going to know.
Okay, so that's a little bit of a takeaway, maybe a tip there. I wonder from an onboarding perspective, if MSPs should actually be collecting those details of who to call. I don't know. I'm going to put my little asterisk there and, not provide insurance advice, but maybe that's an idea that, from the people on the call that as a takeaway. Aaron, what have you done in the past?
Well, look, there's two sides to this conversation. There's one for an MSP having a breach themselves. That in itself, Jason, I don't think many MSPs, definitely not the whole staff, would have any clue if they had insurance or not, or let alone who to call.
Yeah, good point.
I know in our situation, it would have been shit, call Aaron. And that's not a good incident response plan, but everyone needs an incident response plan. So I had those details and a handful of others had those details, but it wasn't correctly plastered all over the walls like it should have been in the event that we weren't available. So a proper incident response plan is important. And going back to that two sides of it, Ben, you've got your incident response plan, but then you've got the customers. Now, there should be different, right? If you're having a systematic MSP breach, oh my God, my RMM's popped and shit's going wild and I'm losing customer by customer at the moment, what do we do? Well, your incident response plan is going to be pull the cable and then start figuring things out. But if you might not be able to pull the cable, who knows, right? But onto your customers, Ben, I don't know what the right answer is about you holding insurance details. Maybe Andrew, you can give us some advice there on customers, because I at Roden always put it down to no, customers' insurance is their cyber insurance. We're not getting involved. We're definitely not going to be the conduit to contacting insurance. That's not written into our agreement.
Yeah, I'd expect that the customer would have to call them. Andrew, how would that usually operate? Or how would that work?
Normally what we see is the customer needs their own cyber insurance, standalone. But the funny thing is, they have a breach. Probably the first thing they're going to do is call the MSP. 1-800, 1-800 is MSP. Please help us. We're in deep doggy do. So I think there's an opportunity for the MSPs to say to the client, in addition to your whatever insurances, Mr. Customer, Miss Customer, you have, make sure that you have a cyber policy in case things break out. Because why do you want it? Why do you want to have it? You want to have it because yes, you get that instant response, but also protection for things like, in the case of a data breach, the fines under the Privacy Act are up to $2 million and more per incident. And the Optuses of this world, the Medibanks of this world, they're up to hundreds of thousands of incidents. So it's a scary part. But I think there's a lot of responsibility on the MSP to provide a little bit of that guidance, say, hey, talk to your insurance, Mr. Customer, Miss Customer, talk to your insurance specialist and make sure you have the cyber policy and you know who to call in the case of a breach.
So putting the onus back on the customer. And that does sound like the safer bet, right? Then you don't have to collect everything. Okay, so my number one.
That's what we were doing. Yeah.
Onboarding and collecting that details was probably not that great.
I want to jump in. Sorry, Ben. I want to jump in and talk about something that's probably the biggest exposure that we see for MSPs, and that is bad advice. So MSPs provide advice to customers. For example, selecting applications, keeping the lights on, data migrations, they've moved from Google to Microsoft, whatever it is. So the trouble is, if things go wrong, there's a very good chance that the MSP could be held responsible. And that protection is professional indemnity insurance. And actually,
not cyber insurance.
Not cyber insurance. So as a distinction. So, and just keep in mind that professional indemnity does not include cyber insurance. In fact, insurers have gone out of their way in the last sort of 4 or 5 years to say, hey, we don't come anywhere near the cyberspace. So our belief is most of the exposure from an MSP, and actually what we're actually seeing in claims, the exposure is professional indemnity. It's providing that advice. And the data breach for the customer might end up that the customer blames the MSP for that data breach. They left the door open. They switched off MFA. They didn't patch something. Something as simple as that, and then hold the MSP accountable. So even though it became a cyber incident, the claim is for bad advice, and that protection for the MSP is professional indemnity. So I think it's an important distinction for people to know.
Well, we've actually got a question in the chat. So how do you balance getting the insurer involved to help reduce the breach impact in real time versus the risk of self-incrimination? For example, your duty to mitigate against the breach. Is that professional indemnity is kind of what that helps protect you from in that sense?
Absolutely. And there becomes a bit of a duty of care, right? So as the MSP, you're probably the number one go-to guru for anything IT for your customer. And if something goes wrong, you can't just leave your client to sink, can you? And you've got to do what you believe is responsible. And if you do the right thing, no matter what it is, if you do the right thing, it's going to be reflected. If it's done in the right place, it's got to be reflected nicely in the claim. So I think I don't think you have an MSP going, oh, sorry, can't help you. We're going to incriminate ourselves here. They will be jumping into IT.
We got into IT because we enjoyed, most of us did anyway, right? And that's the first instinct for a lot of us is to kind of, oh yeah, we'll help, even if it is at our self-incrimination or disadvantage. I've got another question in the chat from Mark, and Mark asks, what happens when they don't want cyber insurance? In that, can you give us some challenges that we might be able to go back to these customers with? Mark's got an example here that before Christmas, they got breached, and as the MSP they got up and running, but he got them up and running so quickly that in 4 hours or so, and billed them for it. But they were like, oh well, that's my I'll just pay for that when it happens. So my first tip to you there, Mark, is you probably should just charge, I don't know, 10 times that. That'll scare them more. But Andrew, what in your real capacity is advice? What would you suggest?
Yeah, exactly. It's a difficult thing because, right, the customer, they look at their own risks and they say, well, hang on, we don't want cyber. It's hard to get. It's expensive. So I think there's an opportunity for MSPs to say very clearly to the customer, your exposure becomes yours. So if you have a data breach, you're not protected in terms of, say, a fine for breach of the Privacy Act and the business interruption. We're not responsible. You probably need, at this point, I need to point out, you probably need a lawyer because it becomes very legal very quickly. So you might need a lawyer to provide some advice, but it really is an opportunity for MSPs to say, hey, the complexity of the world is just getting so extreme. You need to understand what your risks are and what your mitigations. It's not to say that insurance is the be all and end all. It is not. It's only one risk mitigation. but there might be a whole bunch of things that they can do without buying insurance to protect themselves. But if things blow up, really blow up, they need that protection, that insurance protection.
Okay.
All right. Can I add to that, Ben?
Please.
Just for Mark, just for your incident there. It's probably really important to understand what incident response really is. It's what you're explaining there. You got them back up and running with 4 hours. That's awesome. I'm sure whatever happened there, you restored backups, images. Great. I agree with Ben. You probably should have charged more, but I'm interested in, and I'm always interested in, root cause. Like, what was the root cause? What took them down? Because what you did was just restoration. It wasn't necessarily forensic root cause to figure out what happened, how that breach happened in the first place. All these things are really, really important for that customer. So you can then say, all right, well, this is what happened. We need to make sure it doesn't happen again. Now, I agree. Yeah, okay. So the issue, I see your comment come through. The issue was from a user click-through. Great.
Damn end users.
Okay, but that's where I would start framing questions around. We're going, see, you can see how easy this happened. We need to not just put protections in place. You need detections, which we can talk about later, but also, like Andrew's been speaking about, that incident response is really important. There's ways to do that through insurance. If they don't want to do it through insurance, great. There's other ways to have incident response companies ready. If it's not insurance, I would, I don't think you need to get into providing the advice. Andrew, tell me if I'm wrong there on whether they should have insurance or not, but it all comes down to risk management. And what they're saying there is, see, we don't need it. Great. It only cost $1,500 this time. I always talk about this kind of stuff, proactive security things and insurance and all of this that we're talking about today. It's like when we were selling backup 15 years ago. People were like, nah, I don't want to spend the money on backup. The second they had a data loss, they threw the checkbook at backup solutions. This security stuff is the same, whether it's insurance or proactive security, it's the same. Until they have a real nasty breach, they're probably going to be like, do we really need it? I don't know if we really need it. And then trust me, that one was only $1,500 in 4 hours. What if it was 4 weeks and 50 or 60% data loss and their business couldn't operate and it was reputation and the board of directors wanted answers and sister companies and vendors wouldn't work with them anymore? All of these things happen on the back of a real breach. I see it every day. So yeah, one, having a root cause, a certificate, a report that says, this is what happened, forensically, this is what happened, this is what you've done about it to fix it. That's worth its weight in gold. And 2, that's when they'll probably start taking security seriously, which is unfortunate, but it's the reality, I think. So I think we've all probably experienced it, right? So.
Absolutely. And Aaron, just to jump in there, like it was, and this Mark's point was, it's a user click through. So for example, we have, for our team, we have cyber training on a fortnightly basis. So the whole, every team member has cyber training, because we know statistically one of the biggest exposures is a teammate clicking on the wrong link. And then that causing all sorts of, it's the main way in for ransomware. And we know that from the statistics, from the claim statistics. So the cyber training is not, it's not necessarily buying the insurance, but it's a risk mitigation that's really important.
Agreed.
I think that fortnightly, Andrew, you're cracking the whip.
Oh, well, yeah, fortnightly. Extreme.
All right.
We recommend it like crazy.
we've got a couple of other questions, guys. We've got one from Broden here that we've previously seen now ex-clients get breached, and after our remediation efforts have completed and our post-incident review and report is provided, we've advised them to seek legal advice regarding the mandatory data breach disclosure laws. Now, we heard about this from a few years ago, but it's kind of died down a little. I guess that's why to a degree, they're on 7 o'clock news now, right? But Broden continues, what risk is associated with that approach, assuming the client decides to not seek advice? Doesn't follow your, the regulations around the data breach notification. That's on them?
That's on their head. Yep. Again, you might need legal counsel on this. We're not lawyers, but it's the responsibility. If company A has a data breach, it's their responsibility under the Privacy Act. If they turn over more than $3 million a year, it's on their head to notify.
That might be changing as well. And I think
It's starting. It's starting.
Yeah, so we've
got
actually got a question, another question that relates directly to that. Does anyone have any thoughts or details on the recent privacy bill changes? For those of you that don't know, I don't know if they've actually gone through yet, but the government is proposing to remove that $3 million cap for privacy breaches, which means even your local fish and chip shops could be liable. Does anyone have any comments around that?
I asked if the changes to the privacy bills and the fines, specifically the increasing fines for data breaches and all these things that are changing or have come in. I asked this at a roundtable about 2 weeks ago with about 20 companies. Has that changed any company CEO's board, anyone's opinion on it? And I got one person said, yeah, they've started asking more questions out of 20. And this was generally enterprise space, mid-market. But it was interesting to see that hasn't even really registered. So
if it hasn't registered in that level of town, I wonder if it's actually going to register at the smaller end of town.
Exactly. So
all right, let's change gears a little bit. So we've talked a little bit about kind of what to do, at an incident. Now, the threat landscape is changing. Something that we've seen, I think most people know that we kind of follow the US in a lot of areas. And what we're seeing in the US is that MSPs have to have, MSP insurance themselves, right? Like actual MSP insurance. I don't think that's here in Australia yet. But in order to be prepared, and this is, we've got things like, ISO, SOC 2, and which is why we've asked Jason to attend today as well. So Jason, from your perspective with the landscape changing, what things, in your opinion, do MSPs need to consider over the next year?
Yeah, look, from an ISO perspective, it's always been something that MSPs have thought it was only for the bigger boys in town, right? Your data comms, your high end of town, your government jobs. And that was true, 6-7 years ago. I can honestly say that probably was more the landscape back then. If you did want to go for, any government work, they were starting to ask, are you ISO 27001 certified, or do you have at least the management system within your organization? That was the bare minimum back then. What I've seen happening now, and Medibank and Optus have kind of really sped this up, is that it's now being driven by customers rather than by government. So what I mean by that is, every MSP on this call would have their one marquee customer that they bend over backwards for. They're great for profit, all that kind of stuff, great relationships. And, I just asked the question, if they were all of a sudden to ask you, hey, have you guys got your ISO 27001 certification? Our insurance company is now asking it from all of our suppliers. What would you do, right? And that's generally the catalyst for a lot of these MSPs to turn around and go, well, I don't think that I need it, but if my best client is about to leave, well, then I've kind of got no choice, right? And so it kind of gets driven via your own customer base now. And it's like, well, do we invest in the system itself now to make our business a better functioning business? Because, that is a benefit of putting in a management system. Or do I let my client walk because they now can't do business with us? Because although we think that we're, hyper secure and we've got all the best practices, an external authority hasn't tested that or signed off on that, right? And so you kind of get left in this landscape of, you could potentially lose some of your biggest clients, not because of your service, but because you're not up to standard from what they need their suppliers to have.
So that sounds like a mid-market up issue, but with these, the laws that are changing and, where we might end up in the next couple of years, does that impact smaller business?
Oh, absolutely. I think that it does. I mean, going back to, that one marquee client, if any MSP on this call, kind of lost their one marquee client, I'd say it would be massively detrimental to their business, right? And so it's about mitigating every risk that you can in order to keep your business, thriving. The thing that's important to understand is that MSPs these days are generally doing a really good job with their clients, right? This is more of a formality and a nice, stamp of approval, I suppose, to be able to say, yes, you are great at what you do, you have invested in the right technologies, you are looking after your clients in the best possible way, but you still can't verify that, right? It's still your word against others, right? And so, if it comes down to a 50-50 deal and a client is, weighing you up versus one of your competitors and they've got the certification, it's something in their favor that you just can't possibly compete with. So, I definitely see that certification is going to be pushed all the way through, even to your very small MSPs, because it's already happening now. And I'm having a lot of conversations with MSPs that are just starting up, just to get that out of the way so that doesn't become a risk for them in future.
It's interesting you say that. I can testify to that being true. When we ran our MSP, we had a pharmaceutical company as a client, and as most MSPs, 80% of the revenue came from 20% of that core client base, and we were doing a great job, had great relationships, but their regulatory pieces required that they had, ISO and those and bits and pieces. And at that stage, we didn't meet those requirements. And we lost that client to someone else that met that. And unfortunately, it was one of the big guys, and which they paid a lot more for. And, all of our contacts said they certainly didn't want to, but they didn't have a choice. They were a public company and the rules were the rules. So I guess from that perspective, it would be interesting to for those of you that are doing, QBRs or even just general account management meetings, asking your clients about what their changes are happening within to try and stay ahead of that. We certainly weren't doing that, and it caught us off guard back then, and it hurt. It really did. It was a major client that we thought was secure, and ultimately it wasn't. So, okay.
I think part of ISO 27001 is a recommendation that you should only work with vendors that have ISO 27001, right? So,
right.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
So if they go through those certain practices, that could be a red flag.
But it's not a strict, correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, but it's not a strict requirement. It's a recommendation, right?
Absolutely. The more organizations that are certified, to ISO 27001 and working together means that, you have a overall more secure ecosystem. And so that's the idea behind it.
Yeah, rising tide lift all boats kind of style. But I in our MSP days, Ben, I've walked away from I want to say at least 5 deals because they were very strict on it. They were like, no, we want ISO. Put a strict thing together that you'll have it within 12 months. And I just said, no, thanks. Wasn't going to do it. Wasn't prepared to absorb the cost and do things. We were obviously working with other frameworks and doing our own security in different ways. But I wasn't prepared to not just comply with ISO. It was more about the actual certification, get the rubber stamp. So,
okay. So we've got another question relating ISO certification in the context of cyber insurance. Andrew, how do cyber insurers look upon that? Does it have any context?
Yeah, so just stepping back, 3, 4, 5 years ago, cyber insurance used to be the insurance you could not sell. And now it's become the insurance you cannot buy. And so I suppose that's the starting point to it. So because of the loss ratios, so last year globally, loss ratios were 120%. What that means is for $100 of premium, the insurers paid out $120 in claims. So the thing is, the insurers need to at least break even. It's not sustainable that they make losses for a whole bunch of reasons. I won't go into that, but they need to survive. So they've been absolutely smashed, and it's not just here; it's London, US, everywhere, smashed. So what have they done? They've reduced their capacity. What that means is they reduce the number of or the amount of policies or exposure that they can take. That's the first thing. Second thing is a lot of the syndicates out of the London market have lost their security at all, totally. So So basically the supply of insurance is reduced, premiums have gone up, and the underwriters become very, very picky about the risks that they choose to back. So the ISO, the stuff that Jason does on the ISO, the security, the data security piece is awesome, because it helps paint the picture that particular risk considers their data security as something that's very important. So it's not something that we see insurers requesting, but it's part of the story that we put together to say, hey, this is a great risk, Mr. Insurer, Mrs. Insurer. We think you should take it on.
Right. Interesting that you say that. And those of you that, because I know not everyone will have cyber insurance on, on here, but I do know that the costs of cyber insurance is, quadrupled in the last year. And a lot of, like, to your point, a lot of people aren't even offering it now. So it sounds like if we're talking in that 1 to 2 year path, that if that continues, certainly having ISO is going to be a benefit, because
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, if the end client can't get insurance, it could impact your ability to actually, provide your services to that client as well, right? So yeah, swings and roundabouts in that sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if you've seen, I'm sure most people on the call have probably, if they haven't filled out their own cyber insurance form, they've had to help a client fill out the cyber insurance.
Oh yeah, that's changed over the years.
Correct, right? I used to do this fortnightly. Probably even weekly got to at a point there. But yes, questions they ask, and Andrew, you're the expert in this field, but they change, and they ask the questions that are from Jason, from all the things that ISO are asking you to do. But then you get into other things which all we're all related, right? It's all in the same thing, but you see it, whether it's the NIST framework or CIS or ISO, they're asking the questions, and it's, do you have EDR tools? Do you have 24/7 coverage, which is a security operations center or a SOC? Do you have ISO? Do you comply to any other framework? All these questions make up that, and like you said, makes the insurer more confident. And I'm sure that changes the insurance premiums as well. I don't know if they'll actually tell you as such, but I'm sure it does.
Yeah, Aaron, it's actually more, it's whether you get insurance or you don't get it.
Correct.
It's actually down to that price. It's almost price irrelevant.
Yeah.
So
because we see globally, we see, because like my team's global, and we have plenty of customers sending us their insurance forms, asking how our product, the MDR product, fits, and how does this work, and things like that. In the States, and I don't know if you've seen these ones, Andrew, so I haven't seen it in Australia yet, but in the States, they're actually now saying what product to use, and there's a drop down, and you literally have to pick the vendor, whether it's Sophos or CrowdStrike or whatever. You have to pick which EDR tool you use and say you're using it. So you call it out, right? Which, as you know, Andrew, and I think everyone would know, that means if you're not using that tool when you're going to make a claim, that's going to be a problem, right? So yeah, very interesting.
Absolutely. And, and individual insurers have been burnt by different things. So, SolarWinds, I won't name the insurer, but they got absolutely smashed by SolarWinds claims. So breaches through, and now a key question on their proposal is so there you go. So, but one thing I just like to say for the MSPs, just be careful about completing the proposals for your client. I would make sure that they have reviewed that proposal and sign and date, and they are comfortable with it, rather than making you on the hook in case of the proposal not stating something that they should have, or not acknowledging claims or whatever. I just put that little caveat out there.
That's an awesome point, Andrew. I never ever once, I made a point, I was very strict about it, would fill out the form for them. I would always write either a second document answering the questions separately, or I would just mark it up as comments on on Adobe or whatever. But I would never ever write the answers in for them. Never. I wouldn't fill it out.
Because the proposal forms a very key component of the insurance contract. So whatever you put in there, it's embedded with 2 other documents, and that's the insurance policy combined. Yeah.
Changing topics again a little bit. Back to sort of the ISO, but other certifications in general. MSPs are having to really skill up across the board, right? And we've got a question from Paul here. Are there other certifications that MSPs can obtain to help build credibility when it comes to work within the cybersecurity space? Guys, and Jason, I'll start with you. What have you seen, that beyond maybe ISO that helps build an MSP's credibility?
Yeah, so I would start with ISO being the main thing that you need to look for. If you're offering cybersecurity services and you're not certified yourself, it's going to look weird to your clients. And so it's the one certification that is global, I suppose, that is recognized across the world. So it doesn't matter where your clients are located. It's an all-encompassing information security management system, right? So every country is going to have their own individual, little certifications, if you want, or different avenues to go down. A lot of people always ask, why don't we just do Essential 8, in Australia? And it's like, well, yeah, Essential 8 is super important, but it's not or it's both, right? And so, launching a cybersecurity practice, I would say at a bare minimum, you need to be ISO certified, as a lot of the cybersecurity houses are in the market. And then obviously you have everything else, from there as well. Like Aaron was saying before with NIST, there are others out there. They are not necessarily global, but it depends on what you want to kind of hone in on, I suppose, and what services you want to offer to be able to build your credibility. But absolutely, at a bare minimum, if you're going to be offering cybersecurity services, you'd need to be certified yourself.
I do wonder how many MSPs that have absolutely amazing tech stack, because I know how much MSPs love their tech stack, that they don't tick that box. Aaron, from your side, I mean, you're on vendor land now, but I'm sure Sophos is an absolutely amazing part of every MSP's tech stack. But what else from a certification do you see that your partners are?
Well, you've got to remember there's frameworks and then the certifications, right? So just like Jason was saying there, ISO 27001 is the standard. You can align to it, but you can also be certified in it, and it requires recertification and everything around that. The frameworks, the cybersecurity frameworks, are a little bit different. So I personally love NIST, but NIST can get quite complex if you dig in too far. But I like the concept, the top level, the sort of 5 pillars of it. And I think that is an easy way to help start conversations. The CIS framework is really good. That's a more technical framework. So for MSPs out there, if you're looking to get started, look at the CIS framework, pick level 1 and start there. That's a good one to go with. The good news story out of all these different frameworks is there's a lot of overlapping things because they're all good. And if you do a lot of things from CIS, there's a lot of overlap to NIST. Do a lot of things from NIST, there's a lot of overlap to ISO 27001. They've probably all copied things off each other at some point. They're all the NIST came from there was a joint combination between the public and private sector in the US. So a lot of the insurance forms, if you know NIST well, you can see the questions are actually straight from NIST or from ISO. So there's a lot of overlap. ISO, it's really important, I think, Jason, to say that ISO 27001 is not just about technical stuff. So if you're an MSP technical person here saying, let's go do ISO 27001, you've never looked into it, you're about to find out it's a huge encompassing business information thing. It's pretty big, and Jason's the one to help you get through that. I definitely wouldn't say take it on yourself. But the more technical ones, yeah, the ones that you can take to your customers in terms of like, right, we can make some checklists and I can do some things, CIS and NIST in that regard. So that's what I think.
Perfect summary, Aaron. ISO 27001 is largely about the protecting the information that's coming in and out of your business, right? All of your information assets, where you're storing information, all of your clients, personally identifiable information, all of that kind of stuff. So it is largely around, securing information, where some of those other certs and standards are more, they're highly technical and more on the technical control side, but they are very different. Yeah.
Yeah, and like they all have, like I said, they all have similar things, right? So we talk about controls a lot. You just said the word then, that's what triggered it for me. And Andrew, you spoke about having training every 14 days. That's awesome, but it still doesn't stop someone clicking on something. It definitely minimizes the risk a bit, and all these frameworks, when you go into them, if you start looking, they'll talk about all the controls you need to have, but then the detection and then the response. And all these things are really, really important. That's why I love if you've never done any of this, look at NIST and look at the 5 top pillars and just start to get your head around that, because I think that's a really good starting point. So that's identify, which is identifying your assets, so understanding what you have. Protect, and that's generally where the MSPs and the IT people go. You think of protection, so it's your backups and your antivirus and all those types of things. Detection is the next one. So that's really that 24/7 security operations center stuff that probably gets a bit scary for a lot of the smaller MSPs out there. There's very easy ways to do it now, but that's where that MSSP world comes in, into that detection. Your response is obviously how you actually respond when something goes wrong. And that's, in my opinion, almost the most critical part, because if you do everything else right, but then you don't actually have a plan for when something goes wrong, then what do? Just close your eyes and run around while the house is on fire. So that's important. And then recover. And that's how you recover after the event. So that's why I really like those sort of 5 pillars, because it gets your head in a really good framework to then help with your insurance and your ISO and everything else that comes along the way. So
to touch on Jason's point earlier, I think that's kind of important, that it's not just the top down person, it's the whole organization understands those, making sure it's clear and concise. So staying with the ISO piece of it, what are the first steps, or like if we're going to go down that certification path, then it sounds like that many MSPs are going to need to build that maturity within their business. What are the first steps?
Generally, it's to kind of get in there and see what you've got already, right? A lot of MSPs are running really successful, great businesses, right? That doesn't happen by accident. It's because you've already invested so much time, creating certain policies and making sure that, when a new user starts at your MSP, that you're not just copying the last person that started and giving them their permissions. Like, if this is how you're running your MSP, you're going to be in for a rude awakening, very, very soon, unfortunately. But I know in my heart, I'd like to think in my heart that, everyone on this call isn't doing those sorts of things. And so as far as, where do you start? You just need to figure out, what you've got already, and then figuring out what your gaps are, right? And there's always gaps because, like Aaron was saying, ISO 27001 it's all encompassing. It is quite a large standard. And so, gaps might be in the form of, you might see a lot of your risks, but you're not documenting those risks, right? And then you're not actually mitigating those risks if you can, or, you're not treating them, and you're not actually having discussions with your leadership teams and management about actually, what are we doing about, XYZ that's happening, in the market, right? So it actually does increase your posture over time once you get used to operating within the standard itself. But essentially, going back to starting points, you'll have a lot of stuff already. You just need to figure out what your gaps are. And then you essentially go through a 2-stage auditing process, right? So you go through a stage 1, which effectively is an external auditor coming into your organization and just making sure that every policy and procedure exists, right? So that the management system is complete. So stage 1 is just about writing, right? It's all documentation. And then shortly after that, if you pass, your stage 1 with flying colors, there's no, non-conformances there. Then you do your stage 2, which is effectively external auditors checking for evidence within your organization that you're actually doing what you're saying that you're doing in those policies. Okay, so if you say that you're training every team member when they come on board in XYZ, well then, you want to have a record of that. You want to show that when, this person started in July of 2023, that they went through an ISO onboarding session and they were told about their information security requirements for them as an employee and how seriously you take it and things like that. And so once you pass stage 2 from an evidence perspective, you get awarded your certificate. And then, from there, it's basically, 12-month external audits, which are called surveillance audits. And you kind of, you dive into that each year. But it's not as hard as what, the market has led everyone to believe. It is difficult, but like everything, as long as you've got the right help or the guidance or the resources, you'll be able to achieve it. There's no doubt.
Okay. I think that's really valuable. I know when we first started to look into ISO, it was kind of like, where do you start? And one thing I thought that was interesting, and Aaron touched on it before, which I made a note of, the difference between aligning to an ISO standard and actually being certified. Can you run us through what the differences are?
Yeah, so you can, on an insurance form or on a supplier form, you can tick that you have or that you are aligned to ISO 27001. That basically means you've done all of the hard work. You've got your policies. You believe that you're running the system the way that it should be, but you haven't had an external authority or external auditors come in and give you that ultimate stamp of approval. So aligning compared to being certified means you're saying that, yes, we have it, and it's not certified, right? The risk with being aligned and not certified is that some MSPs in the past have found that it might be an easy way to save, on some auditing fees and just say that you are. But if you're saying that you are, but you haven't been certified, it's a red flag as it is, because if you're aligned truly, then you would be absolutely mad not to actually go ahead and just complete that process and get your certification. So alignment is a little bit of a red flag from a 27001 perspective.
And Andrew, from an insurance, I mean, Jason touched on it then, but from an insurer's perspective, is that a red flag as well?
You know what? There's you've got all these different insurers with different requirements. Cyber insurance is a relatively new insurance. It's not very mature. It's like a teenager that's a bit pimply and does their own thing.
Just trashed its
car.
car.
But it looks like an adult, but inside they're just a 5-year-old child. But and so there's lots of variation. This is unlike, say, professional indemnity or public liability insurances that are very mature, been around for 100, 150, even 200 years. So there's lots of variation. Each insurer takes a different view, but it's back to the insurance that you can't now get if you use the ISO stuff as part, and you say, hey, we're ISO certified, and there's a whole bunch of other things that we do to mitigate the risk, because keep in mind, there's no one silver bullet. Insurance is not a silver bullet. ISO is not a silver bullet. The detection stuff that Aaron has, that's not, but the combination reduces your risk for taking a hit. And that's what it's all about. That's the key to it. So if, and from us, from a insurance specialist, we have to paint the picture to make your risk look good, to be able to get offers from markets and get it in place. And where it's becoming more important is what we're seeing is particularly big end of town, they're requiring you to carry, as an MSP, to carry cyber insurance to be on their panel. So whether you like it or if you want to play, with a Qantas or a Rio or others, you need that, and then you need your insurance specialist, whoever it is, to help you paint that picture to secure a policy to enable you to do business.
So that's interesting, because I think everyone on here has seen on one of their if they've gone for credit terms or whatever it might be, you've got to actually put down, is it your PI or however much you're insured for or whatnot. So it sounds like that's going to be one of those extra questions where you've actually got to sort of list down your coverage on that as well eventually. So,
absolutely, and it's only going one way, that way up.
Yeah,
that requirement. Yeah, it's only going one way.
Certification in insurance is just becoming the norm. It's getting worse and worse and worse.
And look, I'd encourage everyone on the call, don't try and figure it out yourselves. That's what, we want to present you guys with a couple of different experts here, and there's plenty of them out there. There are risks, but there's also margin to be made as well, right? So as wherever there is a risk. But with that brings us to time, guys. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure having you guys on the call. It was very, very engaging. We had plenty of questions today, which is always good to see. If you guys do have any other questions from the audience, feel free to shoot them through. We will be running around sending around everyone's details. We've got some assets that we'll be sharing as well. So make sure you check those out. And if you have any questions, let us know. Just quickly put up our upcoming events though. So our next MSPs in conversation, hopefully we can see that, on April the 18th is our next one, which is streamlining your MSP operations, best practice tools for increased profitability. So very exciting. The other ones are subject to change, but April 18th is 100% locked in. As always, if you've got a topic that you would like us to bring to you guys, please let us know. Meryl, our marketing manager, is always excited to have that chat. So feel free to reach out and let us know. Again, guys, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Ben.
you.
Thanks,
Great. Thanks, Ben.
Jason, Aaron. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jason, Andrew. Cheers. See you guys.